What happens when the man you've been mocking turns out to be your boss? In the bustling streets of downtown Dallas, a quiet storm was brewing. Michael Johnson, dressed in his usual uniform of practical work attire, made his way toward one of the city's most prestigious dining spots, Bel Andrea's Fine Dining. Known for its high-end clientele and exclusive reputation, it was a place that oozed sophistication, but Michael didn't mind. He was there for business, not pleasure. His task? To deliver organic seafood and grains, essential ingredients for the day's meals. As Michael approached the back entrance with his trolley stacked high with boxes, he was met with a different reality. The staff inside eyed him with dismissive glances, their amusement palpable. He could hear the faint snickers, the whispered jokes, and the unmistakable tone of superiority that marked this place. They saw him just another delivery man, nothing more. To them, he was invisible, just a cog in the machine of the restaurant's operation. Michael, however, knew better than to let their ignorance affect him. He'd been in situations like this before, where assumptions and bias tainted the way people saw him. But today, he wasn't just a delivery driver. He was a man with a purpose. He entered the kitchen, greeted by a cold shoulder and a pointed comment about his uniform. One of the chefs, a man named Matt Hughes, sneered as he inspected the delivery. His words were laced with sarcasm, asking if this was really the best seafood the supply could offer. Michael stood firm, not allowing the remarks to rattle him. He had learned long ago that the work he did, though often unacknowledged, was critical to the success of these establishments. He unloaded the boxes, quietly but efficiently, while the staff continued to mock him in hushed tones. The worst part wasn't the jokes or the condescending looks. It was the assumption that Michael's worth was tied to his job, his appearance, and his role in the hierarchy. But what they didn't know was that Michael's path had been anything but ordinary. He wasn't just a delivery driver, he was a man who had climbed from humble beginnings to achieve success through grit, perseverance, and a commitment to excellence. And one day, he was going to prove that to them. But for now, Michael stayed silent, doing his job with the same quiet dignity that had gotten him this far. He knew that sometimes actions speak louder than words. As Michael continued his work, the air in the kitchen grew heavier with the staff's dismissive energy. The laughter and mocking whispers blended into the background as he moved quietly from one task to the next. He had learned long ago that silence, paired with unwavering focus, was the most powerful response to people who underestimated him. But today there was something different in the air, something that told him this moment would matter far more than just another delivery. He could feel their eyes on him as he made his way back to the truck for the second load. The way they glanced at him, the hushed comments about his appearance, it was all too familiar. It wasn't the first time he'd been judged based on his looks, his job, or his station in life. But this time, something stirred within him, a quiet resolve that he hadn't felt before. Michael was no longer just a man making a delivery. He was a man with a point to prove. And the moment wasn't just about them seeing his worth. It was about him finally seeing it for himself. When he returned for the final trip into the kitchen, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. The mocking was still there, but now it felt more like an act of cowardice than power. Michael could hear the kitchen staff chuckling again, whispering jokes as they worked. One voice in particular stood out. A waiter's voice, dripping with condescension, said loud enough for Michael to hear, "Yeah, go back to wherever you came from." That was the tipping point. Michael stopped in his tracks, his hand resting on the door handle for a moment, the weight of the words hanging in the air. His body turned slowly, meeting the waiter's gaze. The room fell into silence, the kind of silence that comes just before a storm. Michael didn't flinch, didn't react with anger, but rather with calm certainty. "I came here," Michael said, his voice carrying through the quiet room, "to deliver something you clearly need more of." The words rang out, sharp and direct, cutting through the uncomfortable laughter that had preceded them. The room held its breath, the staff unsure of how to react. But Michael wasn't there to react. He was there to lead, to show them something they hadn't been willing to see. Respect wasn't a favor, it was a necessity. And it started right then, in that moment, with everyone in that room. As Michael turned and walked back towards his truck, he could feel the weight of the silence in the kitchen following his words. The lingering gaze of the staff wasn't lost on him. He wasn't angry, but something deeper had shifted within him, an understanding that what he had just said wasn't just for them, it was for him too. The years of silently enduring judgment, the daily underestimation, all of it had led to this point. He wasn't just delivering seafood, he was delivering a message that would resound far beyond that kitchen. The truck rumbled as Michael took a moment to gather himself, his hand resting on the steering wheel. He couldn't shake the thought of how often people judged him for the role he played in life. It wasn't just the kitchen staff, he had felt the same sting of assumptions throughout his life, from the small towns he'd worked in to the early days of his career. People saw him as just another delivery driver, just another man in a uniform. They never saw the years of sweat, sacrifice, and relentless effort it had taken to get to where he was now, but today was different. As he sat in the driver's seat, Michael realized that this moment wasn't just about those in the kitchen. It was about everyone who had ever looked down on him. He knew the journey ahead wasn't easy, but this was a chance to make the world around him see things through a different lens. His work ethic, his commitment to excellence, it wasn't defined by the job he did. It was defined by the values he carried with him. He checked his watch. It was almost time for the staff meeting. Michael wasn't one for drama, but today he had a lesson to deliver. Not just for the kitchen staff, but for everyone who crossed the threshold of Bellandria's. Respect, humility, equality, these weren't just buzzwords to him, they were the foundation of everything he had built. The restaurant, his empire, everything. If he was going to lead this place, if he was going to turn it into something better, it had to start with respect for every person who walked through that door. Whether they were a guest, a staff member, or a delivery driver, they all deserved to be treated with dignity. With a deep breath, Michael put the truck in gear and headed back to the restaurant. The meeting was about to begin, and he was ready to set the tone for what came next. As Michael stepped into the meeting room, the tension in the air was thick, almost palpable. The staff had gathered, their murmurs dying down as they caught sight of him. Dressed in the same delivery uniform he had worn earlier, Michael made his way to the center of the room, his posture calm yet resolute. The silence that greeted him wasn't unfamiliar. He had spent most of his life in moments like this, where his presence was met with surprise or even mockery. But today was different. The murmurs were replaced by confused glances, some staff members clearly unsure of what was happening. Michael stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his next words sink in. This wasn't just about introducing himself as the new owner of the restaurant. It was about setting the tone for what would come next. He wasn't here to gloat, to boast about his success. He was here to make a point, to ensure that the culture of this restaurant, and by extension the people within it, could evolve. "Good afternoon," Michael began, his voice steady but firm, carrying an unspoken authority. "I know most of you are wondering what this meeting is about. It's simple, really. This is about respect." There was a subtle shift in the room. People exchanged glances, some unsure whether they were hearing him correctly. Michael continued, his gaze sweeping over the staff. "I've spent the last few hours observing, seeing how you all operate. And what I saw wasn't just disappointing, it was a clear reflection of the culture here. A culture that judges people based on assumptions, based on appearances, and frankly, a culture that has forgotten the core values of respect and equality." The staff shifted uncomfortably, some heads bowed, others daring to look at each other in disbelief. Michael knew that this was a hard truth, but it was one they needed to hear. He wasn't about to sugarcoat it or let them off easy. They had to face their actions, their judgments, their assumptions, and they had to know that their behavior had consequences. "I've been where you are," Michael said, his voice softening slightly, but still carrying the weight of his journey. "I started out in this business, not as a manager or a restaurant owner, but as a dishwasher. I worked my way up, just like many of you, doing jobs that no one notices. And I know that those jobs are just as important as the ones that are more glamorous. What I want you to understand is that everyone who walks through these doors, whether they're a guest, a staff member, or someone delivering the ingredients, deserves to be treated with dignity." The room grew quieter. Michael could feel the shift in energy. People were no longer looking at him with suspicion or judgment. They were listening, really listening. Michael knew it wouldn't be an easy road, but this was the first step. If he could change the way they saw each other, if he could create a culture of respect, then this restaurant would be more than just a fine dining establishment. It would be a place where everyone, regardless of their position, felt valued. The silence in the room seemed to linger, a weight that held everyone's attention. Michael Johnson's words had landed, and the shift in the room was palpable. The uncomfortable glances between the staff were now replaced with a quiet understanding that things had to change. Michael knew that this was just the beginning. One speech wouldn't alter years of ingrained behavior or erase the culture that had built up in this restaurant, but it was a start, and that was all he could ask for. He waited a moment longer, letting the silence settle before speaking again, his voice carrying an air of authority tempered with sincerity. This restaurant has potential, but it's not going to reach it if we continue like this. The way you treat each other, the way you treat our guests, and the way you treat people in positions like mine, it all matters. Every role in this restaurant is valuable, from the person who greets the guests to the ones who prepare their meals. Every person contributes to the experience we offer here. The words were simple, but they cut deep. Michael had seen how the staff had behaved in his absence, how they had sneered and judged based on appearances, how they had assumed he was just another delivery driver to be dismissed. It was that kind of attitude that led to broken relationships, poor customer service, and ultimately, failure. I didn't get here by being superior to anyone. I got here by working hard, by staying focused, and by recognizing that every role is essential, Michael continued. So, if you want to be part of this team, part of what this restaurant is becoming, then you need to treat every person you come into contact with the same respect you'd want for yourself. We're building a culture where kindness, dignity, and fairness are the foundations, not hierarchy and privilege. As Michael spoke, he could see the change in their faces. Some of them, like Matt Hughes, still seemed unsure, their pride taking a hit. But others, those who had perhaps seen the errors of their ways, nodded slowly, their expressions softening. Michael could feel the room begin to thaw, the harsh walls of judgment and assumptions starting to break down. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Bel Andreas, Michael said, his gaze sweeping over the room, and I expect each of you to be a part of that. If you're not willing to make the change, then you're not the right fit for this team. But I believe in each of you. I believe that we can be better together. The room was still, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Michael didn't expect instant change, but he knew that this moment would echo in the hearts and minds of the staff. They had been given a chance, a responsibility, and most importantly, a challenge, to be better than the assumptions they had made and to work towards a future where respect and equality weren't just ideals, but realities. As the staff absorbed Michael's words, a shift seemed to occur. Not an immediate transformation, but a crack in the surface, a small opening for something better to take root. For the first time, Michael saw the beginnings of a change in the room. The tension was still thick, but the staff, particularly Matt Hughes, began to look introspective. Michael knew that real change was not about immediate compliance. It was about planting a seed of understanding and letting it grow over time. He took a moment to let the room digest everything he had said, his gaze sweeping over the group. No one spoke right away, and Michael could tell that some of them were still processing, still wrestling with their own biases, pride, and preconceived notions. But he didn't expect them to become perfect overnight. Instead, Michael took a step back, allowing them the space to reflect on what had just transpired. It wasn't about making grand gestures. It was about the quiet decisions each person made every day, every moment. That's what defined the culture of an establishment. I know some of you might be uncomfortable right now. Change isn't always easy, Michael said softly, his tone more compassionate now. But that discomfort is a sign that we're moving in the right direction. It means you're questioning your assumptions, and that's the first step toward growth. There was no anger in his voice, only a quiet resolve. Michael knew that respect couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned, and more importantly, it had to be practiced consistently. He was setting a standard for the team, not through force, but by showing them the value of humility and mutual respect. As Michael turned to leave the room, he paused at the door and added one last thing. his voice firm yet gentle. "I'll be back in a few weeks to check in on how we're progressing. In the meantime, reflect on today. Think about how we can all contribute to making Bel Andreas a place where everyone feels valued. That's what this business is about, treating people with the dignity they deserve, regardless of their role or their status." With that, Michael left the room, the weight of his words lingering in the air. As the door clicked shut behind him, the staff remained silent for several moments. A new chapter had begun at Bel Andreas, and it was now up to them to write the next page. The foundation had been laid, but only time would tell whether they would build on it. As Michael stepped out of the dining room, his calm demeanor never faltered, but inside, a quiet sense of accomplishment began to settle. The day hadn't been about vengeance or asserting power. It was about a moment of truth, a pivotal moment when his team could either rise to the challenge or continue down the path of complacency. Michael had shown them what it meant to stand firm in one's values, to reject prejudice, and to embrace the inherent worth of every individual, no matter their role. The silence in the room spoke volumes. No one rushed to speak. No one tried to fill the heavy space with words that might have been meaningless in the face of what had just transpired. Michael knew that, deep down, this wasn't about him. It was about the culture of respect and dignity he intended to foster. He'd watched as the team digested his words, seen the uncertainty and shame creep in, but also witnessed the tiny flicker of realization in their eyes, and that flicker, however small, was the most important step toward transformation. It wasn't long before the murmurs of apology began, tentative at first but growing stronger as they found their footing. Matt Hughes was the first to approach, his usually confident swagger gone, replaced by a humble unease. "Michael," he began, his voice low, "I owe you an apology. I didn't see you for who you really are." His words were genuine, but Michael knew they would only hold weight if followed by action. "I appreciate that," Michael replied, his tone steady, "but it's not just about words. It's about how we show up for each other every day, not just when it's convenient or when someone is watching. You have the power to lead, Matt. Your team looks to you for guidance. If you want to change, you have to set the example, not just with your cooking, but in the way you treat the people around you." The chef nodded solemnly, the weight of Michael's words settling over him. There was no denying that he had failed to recognize the significance of his role in shaping the restaurant's atmosphere. The power dynamics that had existed before Michael's arrival were rooted in entitlement, exclusion, and judgment, habits that had been nurtured over time. But now, with a single conversation, those patterns had begun to crack open. The meeting ended with a promise, an unspoken agreement, that things would be different moving forward. Michael knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. True change never was. There would be moments of pushback, resistance, and even failure, but there would also be moments of growth, understanding, and collaboration. Those moments, however small, would build the new foundation of Bel Andreas, a place where every person was valued and treated with respect. As Michael drove away from the restaurant that evening, the sunset casting a warm glow over the Dallas skyline, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. It hadn't been an easy path. Nothing worth doing ever was. He had started at the bottom with nothing more than grit, determination, and a dream. He had worked his way up, proving time and time again that his worth wasn't defined by his circumstances or the expectations of others. And now, with Bel Andreas, Michael had the opportunity to do something truly impactful. He wasn't just changing a restaurant. He was changing the way people thought about each other, the way they treated one another, and how they built their futures together. Every lesson he had learned along the way, about hard work, humility, and empathy, had led him to this moment. The struggle had been real, but the rewards, Michael knew, would be far greater. The lesson of the day was clear. Respect is not something you can take for granted. It must be earned, nurtured, and protected. It's a choice we make every day, in every interaction. When we fail to honor that, we lose not just trust, but the opportunity to create something greater than ourselves. Respect, dignity, and understanding, these are the building blocks of any successful enterprise, and Michael was committed to ensuring that Bel Andreas would be the living proof of that truth. The real work was just beginning, but Michael knew that with the right foundation, anything was possible. In life today, we can apply Michael Johnson's example in our everyday interactions. Whether at work, in social settings, or even within our families, it's crucial to challenge our assumptions and recognize the humanity in everyone we encounter. We must actively create spaces where people are valued not for their role or appearance, but for the contributions they bring. Additionally, as leaders or peers, we should set the tone for respect, humility, and accountability in all environments. By treating others with dignity, regardless of their background or position, we foster an atmosphere where collaboration, growth, and mutual respect can thrive. Respect isn't just about professional relationships, it's about creating a culture that uplifts everyone, regardless of their status. Let's take a moment to reflect. How often do we challenge our biases? And how can we create a more inclusive and respectful environment in our lives?